Elias Moreno had always believed that some moments arrive in life without warning but change everything after them. That belief became real on a warm afternoon in the high desert of Arizona, where the sun spread soft gold on the sand, and the wind carried the smell of sage and dust. He had come for a volunteer assignment as a wildlife medic, expecting peaceful days caring for injured animals, quiet evenings under big skies, and nothing more. But life had prepared a very different introduction for him. He was driving slowly along a dirt road that cut through open land belonging to the Apache community when he noticed something unusual near an old wooden sign. A group of people stood in a circle. Their voices rose and fell in sharp tones, not loud enough to sound dangerous, but tense enough to make Elias uneasy. He slowed the truck and studied the scene more carefully. At the center of the group stood a young woman. She looked calm, but her eyes were fierce with determination. Her long dark hair moved gently with the breeze, and the way she held herself tall, steady, unshaken made her stand out immediately. Elias could tell she was from the Apache community, even before he later learned her name. Nina Dashi. She was pointing to the earth near her feet, explaining something, but the people around her kept interrupting. They were not from the community. He could see that quickly from their clothes, their equipment, and the way they examined the land like they were measuring ownership instead of appreciating its story. Elias hesitated. This was none of his business. He wasn't from here either. He didn't know the customs or the history of this specific land, and he had no reason to step into someone else's disagreement. But something about Nina's expression held him. She wasn't scared. She wasn't angry. She wasn't trying to fight. She simply looked tired. Not the tired that comes from a long day, but the tired that comes from explaining the same truth again and again to people who don't want to hear it. Before he could think much more, one of the men stepped closer to her, gesturing toward a map he carried. Nina stepped back politely, giving him space. But Elias didn't like the shift in mood. No one raised a hand. No one made a threatening move. Still, he felt he should at least check what was happening. His instincts as a medic and simply as a person who cared nudged him forward. He parked the truck and walked toward them. Not too fast, not too loud, just steady enough to show he meant no harm. As he approached, he heard clearer pieces of their conversation. "This land is marked on our chart," one of the men said. "We have papers. This land belongs to my people," Nina replied in a calm tone. "I am only asking you to speak with the tribal office before you make any plans here." "Our plans don't involve your office," another man said with a shrug. "We already have permission." "From whom?" Nina asked gently. There was no answer. Elias didn't know every detail yet, but he understood something simple. She was alone, standing firm, and the conversation was not balanced. That was enough for him to step closer. "Hi," he said with a friendly nod toward the group. "Is everything all right here?" The men turned to him, slightly surprised. Nina looked at him briefly, her eyes curious but unreadable. "We're fine," one of the men said quickly. "Just clearing up a misunderstanding." Nina didn't argue. She simply folded her arms and waited. Her silence wasn't agreement, it was confidence. She wasn't intimidated. She was patient. Elias smiled politely. "Well, I'm working with the wildlife team nearby. Just wanted to make sure everyone's okay." "We're okay," the man repeated, but his tone suggested he wished Elias hadn't stopped at all. Nina looked at Elias, and for the first time, he saw a brief softness in her expression, grateful, but cautious. Elias didn't push further. He simply stayed nearby, not joining the argument, not choosing sides, just being a calm presence. Sometimes, having an extra pair of eyes changes the way people behave, even without a word spoken. The men continued explaining their charts. Nina continued correcting their misunderstandings. The conversation shifted slowly, losing its earlier sharpness, becoming more practical. Eventually, the men realized they would need to speak with the tribal administration after all. No one won, but the situation ended without any harm, which was all Elias had hoped for. They packed their materials and walked away toward their two trucks parked a little distance away. As they left, Nina bent down to pick up a small necklace charm that had fallen during the discussion. When she stood again, she finally looked at Elias directly. "Thank you," she said simply. "I didn't do much," Elias replied, rubbing the back of his neck. "You did enough," she said. "Sometimes people act differently when a stranger is watching. Even if the person watching doesn't say a word." Elias gave a small smile. "Well, I'm glad everything ended calmly." Nina nodded. "That is always the goal." She started walking toward a narrow trail leading deeper into the land. Elias wasn't sure if he should say more. He didn't want to seem intrusive, but he also didn't want the moment to end so quickly. Something about her pulled at him, a strength wrapped in serenity, a confidence that didn't need to shout, a quiet heart that carried heavy stories. Do you work around here often?" he asked finally. She stopped and turned back to him. "I live here," she said. "My family has lived near this land for many generations." "Oh," he said, now embarrassed at the obviousness of his question. "Right. That makes sense." She didn't laugh at him. Instead, she smiled, a small smile, but warm. "And you're here for the wildlife program?" "Yes, I'm here for a few months, mostly helping with injured animals, checking habitats, things like that." "Important work," she said. Elias nodded. "I'm trying." There was a moment of silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Then Nina said, "Those men believe they have rights to a piece of this land. Many people come here thinking they own what they do not understand." Elias listened carefully. "Do they come often?" "Not those exact men," she replied. "But people like them, yes. They see land as something that can be measured on paper. But our people see land as something living, something you care for, not something you claim." There was weight behind her words, not anger, not bitterness, just lived truth. "I'm sorry you have to deal with that," Elias said. "It's part of life here," she responded. "But still, thank you for stopping." She turned again to continue down the path. Elias wanted to say something more, but he didn't know what. He watched her walk away, her figure moving with quiet confidence, as if she belonged to the land, and the land belonged to her, not in ownership, but in spirit. As she disappeared around a curve, the desert seemed quieter, the wind softer. The world somehow changed, though nothing dramatic had happened. Elias stood there for a long moment, his hands resting lightly on his belt, his mind still replaying the scene. He didn't understand everything about what had happened. He didn't know the details of the land issue. He didn't know Nina's history, her struggles, or her responsibilities. But he knew one thing very clearly. He wanted to see her again. Not because she needed protection, she clearly did not. Not because he thought he could fix anything for her, he couldn't. But because something about her presence stirred something inside him. She had strength without harshness, patience without surrender, and a kind of quiet wisdom that made the desert itself seem deeper. Elias returned to his truck, but the drive back felt different. Every mile of dusty road felt like a question he didn't yet know how to answer. He hadn't planned to get involved in anyone's life here. He hadn't planned to feel anything personal. He came to work, to help animals, to keep to himself. But plans don't always ask for permission before they change. As he reached the small volunteer cabin where he stayed, he found his thoughts drifting again and again to Nina, the way she stood her ground with grace, the way she kept calm even when frustrated, the way she thanked him with simple sincerity. He didn't know it yet, but the moment he stepped out of his truck to check on a stranger was the moment his quiet desert assignment became the beginning of a story far larger than anything he imagined. A story tied to the land. A story tied to a woman he had only just met. A story that would challenge him, surprise him, and change him in ways he couldn't yet understand. And deep in the fading light of evening, as the desert sky turned orange and rose, Elias realized something simple but powerful. Some people walk into your life like a soft wind, and some walk in like the first spark of a journey you didn't know your heart had been waiting for. The next morning, the desert air felt cooler, and a soft breeze moved across the land like a quiet greeting. Elias woke early, as he always did. But today, something felt different. Usually he started his day with a cup of coffee outside his cabin, watching the sunrise and listening to the calmness of the desert. But this time, his thoughts drifted back to the young woman he had met the day before, Nina Dashi. Her voice, her patience, her calm strength. They stayed in his mind like a melody he didn't want to forget. He tried to shake off the feeling by focusing on his work. The wildlife program needed updates on injured animals, and he had to check a few habitats near the riverbed. But even as he worked, he kept wondering about the conversation she had with those men. Why were they so sure they owned the land? Why did she have to explain something that seemed so clear to her? By the afternoon, curiosity mixed with concern inside him. He decided to stop by the tribal office. He knew he couldn't ask personal questions, but maybe he could learn more about land boundaries or rules, so he wouldn't feel clueless if something similar happened again. When he arrived, the office was busy. People moved in and out, carrying papers, discussing community events, and planning upcoming activities. The atmosphere felt warm and organized, filled with a sense of shared responsibility. "Can I help you?" a friendly woman behind the counter asked. "Yes, actually," Elias replied. "I'm working with the wildlife program nearby. I saw some people yesterday talking about land rights, and I just want to make sure I understand the area correctly." The woman nodded knowingly. "Let me guess. There were charts, maps, and very confident voices." Elias smiled. "Exactly." She sighed, but kindly. "That happens sometimes. Outside groups come here with documents that don't always tell the full story. Our land has deep history, not always written on paper." Elias listened carefully as she continued. "This area belongs to the tribal community, and there are protected spaces that outsiders can't use without permission. Usually it's not a big problem, but sometimes people misunderstand or assume something that isn't true." "That sounds frustrating," Elias said softly. "It can be," the woman admitted. "But our people have learned to stay patient. We've been handling misunderstandings for generations." As she talked, Elias realized that what he witnessed yesterday wasn't just a random disagreement. It was part of a pattern, something that happened often enough to become familiar to the community. Before he could ask more, he heard footsteps behind him. When he turned, he saw Nina walking through the main door, holding a folder and a thermos of tea. She looked surprised to see him, but her surprise softened quickly into a polite smile. "You're here," she said calmly. "Just learning," he replied. "I didn't want to stay uninformed." She nodded, then spoke to the woman at the counter, handing her the folder. After a short exchange, Nina turned back to Elias. "If you are not busy," she said, "would you like to walk with me? There is something I need to show someone from your program anyway." Elias felt a quick rise of warmth inside him. "Sure," he said. "I'd like that." He followed her outside, where the sunlight bathed everything in soft brightness. "Are you working today?" she asked as they walked along a dirt path near the office. "Yes," he said, "but my schedule is flexible." "That is good. Nature does not follow a clock, so it is better when the people caring for it don't either," she said with a gentle laugh. Elias smiled. "You sound like someone who's been living close to nature for a long time." "I have," she replied. "My grandparents taught me most of what I know. They taught me how to understand the land, the weather, the plants, and the stories behind everything. Our culture sees the earth as a relative, not just a place." He listened with full attention. The way she spoke carried both knowledge and emotion. "You mentioned yesterday that those men had been causing problems," Elias said carefully. "Does that happen often?" Nina walked slowly, thinking before she answered. "Not the same people, but yes. People like them come from time to time. They show up with claims that do not match our records. They believe they found something new. But really they found something old, something we already care for." "That sounds exhausting," he said gently. Nina looked off into the distance, where the land stretched wide and open. "It can be. Not because of the disagreement itself, but because they often think we need to justify our connection to a place. They think they must explain its value to us, when we already know it deeply." Her words carried a quiet sadness, but also pride. "I'm sorry," Elias said softly. "I didn't realize how complicated it gets." "It's not your fault," she replied kindly. "You asked, and that already shows respect." Many don't ask. They assume. Their path led to a small wetlands area where some birds nested. It was peaceful here, with water sparkling in the sun and reeds moving in the gentle breeze. Elias took out his notes, checking on a few nests, while Nina waited patiently, occasionally pointing out details he might miss. "You've studied this place well," he said, impressed by her knowledge. "My family lives nearby," she explained. "I grew up exploring these areas. Every plant, every rock, every trail carries a memory." He loved hearing that. It brought the place to life in a way scientific notes never could. "Do you ever wish things were simpler?" Elias asked. Nina looked at him with thoughtful eyes. "Sometimes. But simple is not always the same as meaningful. Our history is long, and our identity is tied to it. If everything became simple, we might lose the depth." Elias nodded slowly. "That makes sense." As they continued walking, the conversation shifted to lighter topics. They talked about animals, favorite foods, small childhood memories, and stories their grandparents told them. Nina wasn't someone who shared everything at once. She spoke with gentle honesty, offering pieces of her life slowly, like someone placing stones carefully on a path. Yet each piece made Elias want to know more. At one point, Nina paused near a tall cottonwood tree, running her fingers lightly over its bark. "This tree is older than my parents," she said quietly. "It has seen many seasons, many changes. It reminds me that the land is patient. It waits for us to learn." Elias watched her with admiration. There was something deeply soothing about the way she interacted with the world. She wasn't loud or demanding. She didn't try to impress him. She simply was calm, wise, strong, in a gentle way. "Do you mind if I ask something?" he said. She turned to him. "You may ask." Were those men here because of something specific, or were they just confused about the land? She exhaled softly. "They came because of a spring not far from where we met yesterday. It is a place our people protect. They want to use it for something. I don't know what exactly. But they came without asking permission. That is the real problem, not their plans, but their lack of respect." Elias understood her words deeply. Respect was a simple concept, but powerful. "Is there anything I can do?" he asked, not wanting to sound like he was trying to take over. Nina shook her head gently. "Not now. But thank you. It means something when someone offers help with sincerity." Her eyes softened for a moment, and Elias felt his heart respond. They continued their walk until they reached the edge of the wetlands again. The sun had shifted in the sky, painting the land with a warm afternoon glow. Elias wished the walk could last longer. But he knew Nina had responsibilities, and he had work waiting. "Thank you for showing me this," he said. "You're welcome," she replied. "I thought you should understand the land better. And I also wanted to say thank you again for yesterday." He smiled. Nina hesitated, then said, "I am usually careful around people I don't know. But you were respectful. That matters." Elias felt his chest warm with quiet pride. "I'm glad." For a moment, they simply stood there, the breeze moving between them in a soft whisper. Then Nina said, "We will see each other again. This land is not as wide as it looks." And with that gentle promise, she walked away, her steps light, her presence steady as always. Elias watched her go until she disappeared behind a group of trees. His day suddenly felt fuller, like the world had expanded in a direction he hadn't expected. Something important was happening. He didn't completely understand it yet, but he felt it growing, quietly and naturally, like a seed beginning to rise beneath warm soil. And deep inside, he knew this was only the beginning. In the days that followed, Elias found that his thoughts drifted toward Nina more often than he expected. At first, he tried to focus on his work checking animal habitats, monitoring water levels, and updating the notes given to him by the wildlife program. But even while taking measurements or marking tracks in the dirt, he would suddenly remember something she had said, or the calm expression she wore when talking about her land. It wasn't just admiration. It was something quieter, something that tugged at him gently from the inside. One morning, he was checking a group of bushes where small desert birds often built nests, When he heard footsteps behind him, he turned, expecting a wildlife ranger or a volunteer. But instead, he saw Nina walking along the narrow path. "Good morning," she said softly. Elias felt a small, warm spark in his chest. "Good morning. I didn't expect to see you here. I was meeting someone from the council nearby," she explained. "I saw your truck and thought I should say hello." "I'm glad you did," he replied, trying not to smile too widely. She stepped closer, watching the birds flutter among the branches. "You care for this place with respect," she said. "It shows in the way you move and observe." "That means a lot," Elias said, surprised by her gentle compliment. "I'm still learning." "We all are," she replied. "Even people like me, who grew up here." They stood quietly for a moment, simply watching the tiny birds hop from twig to twig. The silence felt peaceful, not awkward. After a few moments, Nina said, "I wanted to talk to you about something important." Elias turned to her. "Of course." She took a slow breath. "Do you remember the men we saw the first day we met?" "Yes," he said. "I've been thinking about that. They came back 2 days ago," she told him. "Not to cause trouble. They said they needed more information for their records. But something felt not quite right." Elias listened carefully. Her voice wasn't fearful, just thoughtful, carefully choosing each word. "I don't believe they meant harm," she continued, "but I believe they are hiding part of their plan. And that worries me. Not because of anything dramatic, but because misunderstandings can grow into bigger problems if not handled early." Elias nodded. "Is there anything I can help with? I don't want you to take risks or get involved in something that is not your responsibility," she said honestly. "But you saw how confident they were in their papers. If someone like you, an outsider but respectful, could help us review what they claim, it might help us understand what we are facing." Elias didn't hesitate. "I'll help in any way I can, even if all I do is read and ask questions." Claude. Nina's eyes softened, and she gave a small nod. "Thank you. That is all I hoped for." They walked toward a shaded area near a cluster of mesquite trees, where Nina had left her bag. She pulled out a folder filled with photocopies, drawings, and printed maps. "These are the documents they brought last time," she said, handing him a few pages. Elias sat on a smooth rock and began reading. Nina sat beside him. Not too close, but close enough that he could feel her presence like a quiet comfort. As he read through the papers, something seemed strange. The maps were recent, but the boundaries didn't match the official maps he had been shown when he joined the wildlife program. Some of the details seemed outdated or incomplete. "Do you see it?" Nina asked gently. "Yes," he said slowly. "Some areas on these charts don't match the tribal maps. That is the issue," she replied. "They believe their documents are correct. We know ours are correct. But the more confusion there is, the harder it becomes to communicate." Round. Elias traced his finger along one of the lines on the map. If someone changed small details or misunderstood old measurements, that might explain it. "That is what we fear," Nina said. "A misunderstanding that will grow into something larger, if not handled carefully." Elias closed the folder and looked at her. "You don't want conflict. You want clarity." "Exactly," she said with a calm smile. "People sometimes think we are trying to push others away, but really we are trying to protect balance." "Balance," he repeated thoughtfully. She nodded. "Balance between people and land, between history and progress, between respect and responsibility." Her words made him feel something he couldn't quite name. Her mind carried depth, her heart carried steadiness, and her presence carried something that felt almost grounding. "I'll compare these with the official maps later," Elias said. "Maybe I can help identify the missing parts." "That would be very helpful," she said. "We don't need a fight. We just need truth." They spent the next hour discussing small details, land markers, old trails, water boundaries, plant habitats. It wasn't complicated work, but it required patience, something both of them seemed to have naturally. During a pause in the conversation, Nina looked at him quietly. You ask good questions, she said. Not questions to challenge, but questions to understand. Elias felt a warmth spread through him. Thank you. I'm just trying to learn. It shows, she replied softly. After reviewing the documents, they decided to take a walk toward the spring that had caused all the confusion. It was not far, just a gentle walk through the desert. Along the way, Nina pointed out plants, explained old stories, and described the meaning behind certain stones or carvings. Elias listened like every word mattered. At last, they reached the spring. It was small, surrounded by reeds, and shaded by tall rocks. The water was clear and calm, reflecting the sky like a tiny mirror. It was peaceful, so peaceful that Elias understood immediately why the community wanted to protect it. This place is important to us, Nina said quietly, not because of its size, but because of its history. Our ancestors found water here during dry seasons. Many families gathered here to rest, to pray, to share food. It holds memories. Elias stood beside her, feeling the significance of the moment. It's beautiful, he said. It is alive, she corrected gently. That is what makes it beautiful. He looked at her, admiring the reverence in her tone. Everything she said carried meaning. Everything she touched was treated with respect. Elias had never met someone like her, someone who spoke softly but lived loudly through her actions. They sat on a smooth stone by the spring, letting the silence settle between them. After a few minutes, Nina spoke again. Sometimes, outsiders come here thinking they must protect us or lead us. They come with big plans and loud ideas. They want to fix everything without knowing anything. Elias turned to her. Is that what you think I'm trying to do? She looked at him with calm eyes. No, she said. You listen first. That is the difference. Her words made his chest tighten, not in pain, but in something gentle and warm. He looked down at the water and said quietly, I want to help, but only if you want me to. I'm not here to take over anything. Nina smiled softly. I know. That is why I trust you enough to involve you. Trust. The word carried weight, real, honest weight. The sun began to dip lower, turning the sky gold. Elias felt time slipping too quickly, wishing he could stay at the spring longer. But knowing Nina had things to attend to, we should head back, she said calmly. Evening comes early in this season. Right, he said, standing up slowly. As they walked back, Elias felt that something had changed between them, not loudly, not suddenly, but subtly. Like the soft beginning of a new season, they were still two people from different worlds, still unsure of the future, still learning each other step by step, but now they were walking side by side with understanding, with trust, and with a growing connection neither of them had expected. When they reached the place where their paths separated, Nina turned to him and said, Thank you for helping today, and thank you for trusting me, he replied. Her smile stayed in his mind long after she walked away. That evening, as Elias sat outside his cabin and looked at the stars, he realized something important. He didn't just want to help Nina solve the land confusion. He wanted to understand her world. He wanted to protect the peace she treasured. And without meaning to, he had begun to care for her deeply, quietly, and naturally. It was a connection he didn't plan, but it was one he hoped would grow. Over the next several days, the weather shifted in small ways. The sky carried more clouds in the mornings, and the breeze seemed cooler when it passed over the desert. Elias felt these changes as he worked, but he also felt a quiet change inside himself, something warm, something hopeful. His connection with Nina had grown slowly, like the soft opening of a flower, each moment revealing a little more beauty. He tried to keep his mind on his daily tasks, but he found himself looking toward the paths she usually traveled, wondering if he might see her walking there with the same calm step and thoughtful light in her eyes. One afternoon, while he was updating notes about the wetlands birds, he heard the familiar sound of footsteps behind him. When he turned, his heart lifted. There she was. Nina carried a small cloth bag and her hair was tied loosely behind her, strands gently moving with the wind. You're here again, she said with a soft smile. I usually am, he replied. This place is starting to feel like home. It feels like that once you understand it, she said. The land welcomes those who listen. She sat beside him on a low patch of grass and took out a small wooden box from her bag. The box was old, carved with careful patterns. I brought something for you to see, she said quietly. Elias watched as she opened the box. Inside were small objects, smooth stones, a few old photos, a tiny wooden carving, and a folded paper that looked worn by time. These belonged to my grandfather, Nina explained. He was someone who understood the land better than anyone I've ever known. She handed him the wooden carving. It was shaped like a bird. Simple, but beautiful. He carved this when he was young, she said. He believed that the desert birds carried messages from the earth. Not spoken messages, but lessons. He said animals teach us things without needing words. Elias held the carving carefully, feeling the smooth wood that had been shaped by hands full of love and intention. He sounds like he was a wise man, he said. He was, Nina replied gently. He taught me to be patient, to wait, to trust that the land gives answers when the time is right. Elias looked at her, seeing the quiet strength she carried so naturally. I think he would be proud of you. Her expression softened. I hope so. After a moment, she placed the items back into the box and closed it, holding it to her chest for a few seconds before returning it to her bag. I didn't just come to show you this, she said. I came because something happened last night. Elias felt his attention sharpen. What happened? She took a slow breath. Some people were near the spring again. Not causing harm, but acting quietly, as if they didn't want to be noticed. One of our neighbors saw them from a distance. Elias felt concern, but he kept his voice calm. Do you know who they were? No, she said. But they carried equipment measuring tools, something like that. It is not wrong for anyone to measure land. But when people do it secretly, it creates worry. Quote, he nodded gently. Of course, I am not afraid, she said clearly. But I am uneasy. The spring is important to us. It has always been respected by those who knew its value. I don't want misunderstandings to grow. Elias leaned forward slightly. Do you want to go there? To check if everything is normal? Yes, she replied, but not alone. And I thought maybe you could come with me. Something warm lifted inside him. Not the pride of being needed, but the honor of being trusted. Of course, he said. I'll come. They began walking the familiar path toward the spring, though this time the air felt different, not dangerous, just heavier, filled with questions waiting to be answered. As they walked, Nina explained what her neighbor had seen. The people hadn't touched anything. They hadn't spoken loudly. They simply walked around the edges of the spring area, taking notes, then left. It could be nothing, Nina said. But when people do things quietly, others start to wonder why. Elias understood. Communication could solve most worries, but silence created confusion. When they reached the spring, the sky had turned soft with evening colors, peach, gold, and faint blue. They walked around the water carefully, checking the ground for any changes. Nothing looked damaged or altered. The area was peaceful. It looks the same, Elias said, relieved. Yes, Nina agreed. But small things can still matter. Let me check something. She walked around to a stone placed near the water. A stone her grandfather had once decorated with tiny hand-carved marks. It had always sat the same way for years. But now, it seemed slightly shifted. Was it like that before? Elias asked quietly. It should not move, Nina said. It is heavy. Someone must have touched it. Maybe they moved it to look underneath. Elias guessed softly. Yes, she said. That is what worries me. Not because anything harmful happened, but because the action suggested curiosity without understanding. Nina stood up slowly, brushing dirt from her hands. She looked out toward the horizon, where the sun dipped lower. I don't want problems with anyone, she said. I just want respect for this place. My community doesn't need control over everything. We only need understanding. Elias walked to her side. Understanding starts with conversations, not assumptions. She turned her head a little and smiled softly. Yes, that is why I appreciate you. You don't assume. There it was again, that gentle warmth inside him. He looked around the spring, thinking, I don't think these people mean harm. But maybe they don't realize how important the spring is. Maybe they think it's just a water source, not a place with history. Maybe, she said. But history should speak, even if quietly. They sat on a low stone together, letting the calm water reflect the fading sky. The silence between them had grown comfortable, rich with unspoken understanding. It must be difficult, Elias said softly, to always have to explain your land to outsiders. It is tiring, Nina admitted. But I have learned to speak with patience. My grandfather used to tell me, if the earth can wait through the seasons, then so can we. Elias admired that. Patience was not his strongest trait. But around her, he felt himself changing, slowing down, listening more deeply. They stayed until the colors of the sky turned softer, almost lavender. We should head back, Nina said gently. The evening grows cool. As they walked the path back, the light fading around them, Elias felt the steady rhythm of their footsteps. Something felt different now. A deeper closeness. A stronger bond woven quietly through the afternoon. About halfway back, Nina slowed her pace. Elias, she said softly. There is something else. He looked at her, waiting. You are an outsider, she said carefully. Her words touched something deep inside him. I feel connected to this place, he said. More than I expected, she nodded. I see that. And it brings me comfort. They continued walking, their hands brushing lightly once when the path narrowed. Neither of them pulled away quickly. Instead, they shared a quiet look, a look that said more than words could. By the time they reached the point where their paths separated, the sky was sprinkled with early stars. Thank you for coming with me, Nina said. I'm glad you asked, he replied. And I'll help in any way I can, always respectfully. Nina smiled, a warm, gentle smile that lingered in his memory. I know, she said softly. And I'm grateful. She walked away slowly, her silhouette blending with the soft shadows of the desert. Elias stood there for a long moment, the night air cool around him, his heart full of unspoken feelings. He didn't know what the coming days would bring. He didn't know what the men wanted with the spring. He didn't know how deeply he was beginning to care for her, but he knew one thing with certainty. He would stand beside her with respect, with patience, and with a heart that was slowly, quietly, falling for her. The next week felt quieter, as if the desert itself was holding its breath. The mornings were cool, and the evenings carried long shadows that stretched across the land. Elias noticed that everything around him, the trees, the animals, the air felt different because he felt different. His connection to the place had grown deeper. But even more, his connection to Nina had grown into something warm and steady inside him. He tried not to overthink it. He didn't want to push anything or expect anything. He only knew that being around her brought him peace, and thinking about her filled his chest with a soft, hopeful warmth. One afternoon, after finishing his notes about the wetlands, he walked toward the tribal office to deliver a few forms. When he stepped inside, he saw a small group gathered quietly near the front desk. Their tones were calm but serious. Among them, he saw Nina standing with her hands gently clasped in front of her. When she noticed him, she gave a small nod of acknowledgement and stepped aside from the group, signaling that she would speak with him soon. After a few minutes, the others left, leaving only Nina and an older woman sorting papers. Nina approached him with a thoughtful look. I was hoping to find you today, she said softly. Is everything okay? He asked. Yes, she said, better than before. She motioned for him to follow her outside. They walked to a shaded spot near a tall juniper tree, where the wind sounded like a soft whisper moving through its branches. What happened? Elias asked gently. Nina drew a slow breath before speaking. The council spoke with the people who were near the spring. It turns out they were not trying to hide anything. They were simply following instructions from someone who misread the boundaries on a very old map. Elias blinked. So it really was a misunderstanding? Yes, she said. The council explained the correct boundaries, showed our records, and invited them to confirm everything themselves. They were surprised, but they agreed. That's good, Elias said, relieved. It is, she nodded. And I believe your notes helped. The maps you compared showed clear differences. That gave us confidence to explain our position clearly. He smiled softly. I'm glad I could help. You did, she said. More than you realize. They began walking along a simple trail beside the office, the sky wide and gentle above them. For the first time, Nina looked more relaxed, like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. When misunderstandings grow, she said quietly, they can create distance between people. I'm glad we stopped that from happening. Well, I'm still 40, Elias nodded. I am too. They walked until they reached a small hill overlooking the open desert. The view stretched beautifully, golden sand, small shrubs, distant mountains glowing in the sunlight. Nina sat on a smooth rock, and Elias sat beside her, keeping respectful space between them but close enough to feel the comfort of her company. She glanced at him with soft eyes. When you first arrived, I thought you would be like many others who come here. Polite, but distant. Helpful, but not truly connected. I didn't mean to be different, he said honestly. I just wanted to understand. That is what made you different, she replied. The breeze brushed gently across their faces. Elias watched the horizon, feeling the peaceful silence between them. After a moment, Nina continued. I don't trust easily. Not because I don't want to, but because I have learned to be careful. My people have carried many stories, some good, some difficult, and I have carried some of those stories myself. Elias listened, careful not to interrupt. But you came with kindness, she said. You came with patience. And you didn't try to speak louder than anyone else. That is why I started to trust you. A gentle warmth filled Elias's heart. I'm grateful for that trust. She looked at him directly. And I want you to know, I don't give it lightly. He felt the meaning behind her words. It wasn't just friendship. It wasn't just appreciation. It was something deeper. A quiet acknowledgement that something meaningful was forming between them. They sat together quietly, letting the wind speak for a while. Eventually, Nina asked, Do you remember the first day we met? Of course, he said, smiling a little. You stood there so calm while those men talked. I was worried something might go wrong. She laughed softly. Nothing was going wrong. I'm used to conversations like that, but you looked. He paused, searching for the right word. You looked strong, and patient, and tired, too. She nodded slowly. Yes, that day I was tired. Tired of explaining. Tired of repeating the same truth. See 1%. And still you stayed calm, he said softly. That is what my grandfather taught me, she replied. He always said, when the earth speaks softly, we must match its tone. She looked at him again, her expression gentler than he'd ever seen before. And you spoke softly too. That's why your presence helped. For a moment, neither of them moved. The world around them seemed unusually still, as if waiting for the next steps in their story. After a long silence, Elias said quietly, Nina, I know I'm not from here. I know I don't fully understand everything yet, but I care. About your land, about your people, and about you. Nina lowered her eyes for a moment, then lifted them again slowly. There was no surprise in her expression, only a soft, deep warmth. I know, she whispered. And I don't expect anything, he said gently. I just want you to know how I feel. With respect, with patience, with honesty. Nina looked thoughtful, almost touched. Respect means everything to me, she said softly. You have shown it. Again and again. And I care too. She took a quiet breath, her voice steady but tender. I care about you, Elias. The moment felt delicate, like something precious settling softly into place. No dramatic gestures, no sudden declarations, only simple, honest truth spoken under the open sky. Nina continued. I didn't want to admit it too fast. I needed to know if your heart matched your actions. It does, he said. I believe you, she replied. The wind rustled the leaves of a nearby bush, and a few desert birds flew across the sky, as if silently celebrating the moment unfolding between them. Nina stood up slowly. Come with me, she said. Elias followed her as she led him along a narrow path he hadn't walked before. The path wound between rocks and small desert plants until they reached a familiar place, the spring. The air here felt serene, almost sacred. The water reflected the soft colors of the nearing sunset. This spring, Nina said quietly, is where my grandparents often sat together. They would stop here after long days, rest beside the water, and listen to the quiet. My grandmother always said this place reveals the heart. Elias listened as she stepped closer to the edge of the water. I brought you here because I want to share this part of my world, she said. Not just the land or the stories, but my trust, my hopes, my heart. Elias felt something warm rise inside him, a gentle, full emotion that spread slowly like sunlight. He stepped beside her, close enough for their shoulders to almost touch. Nina, he said softly, I will always walk with respect. I will always speak with honesty, and I will never take your trust for granted. She met his eyes, her expression calm but filled with something deep and sincere. I know, she whispered. For a moment, they simply stood together, the peaceful spring carrying their reflections. There was no need for grand words, no need for rushed promises. Their connection was real, natural, and gently growing like a desert flower, opening at the perfect time. Finally, Nina said with a soft smile, our story begins here. And Elias felt it too. Their story, built on patience, respect, trust, and quiet affection, was only beginning. Their worlds were different, but their hearts had found a bridge between them, and in the soft light of the fading day, beside the spring she loved so deeply, they began a journey together, slow, steady, meaningful, and full of hope for whatever came next.